For historical context and more information, see the description below.
The 13th verse of the 15th chapter of Proverbs says, "By sorrow of the heart, the spirit is broken." And there's much in the experience of living to support those words. Psychiatrists have pointed out that the failure to handle bereavement is a cause of many ailments. Dr. Lindemann of Harvard describes them as bodily symptoms of pain and distress, continual preoccupation with the image of the deceased, deep feelings of guilt, disinterest in life. And yet it is also true that there are many people in the world who have learned how to live with their grief and eventually how to overcome it. And that's why I have chosen a companion text from the book of Revelation. The book was written by a man whose name was John. It's doubtful that he had any connection with men of similar name in the New Testament. We think that he was originally from Palestine and that he had been sent as an exile unto Patmos. He was quite evidently a man of tremendous spiritual conviction and vision, and it's likely that he was condemned to work in the quarries of Patmos. Now, this must have been a very punishing ordeal for him, but while he was there, he dreamed of other things. He had visions of other things. And in the 7th chapter, he tells of a great multitude standing before the throne. And the angels and the elders were there. One of the elders asked, "What are these which are arrayed in white robes? And whence came they?" And he said, "These are they which came out of great tribulation." They were before the throne of God, and God dwelt among them. They would not hunger nor thirst any more, and God had wiped all tears from their eyes. There was something very distinctive then about these people who had come out of great tribulation. The story, you see, does not end with Proverbs that by sorrow of the heart the spirit is broken. This thing can be conquered, and there can be a special blessing for those who conquer it, but it doesn't come willy-nilly. Handling sorrow demands very serious thinking. It demands very serious praying. And it demands courageous leaps of faith. I believe that such victory begins with a recognition of the fact that it is not good to pride ourselves on our strength, on our fortitude, to the point where we try to keep this whole matter of grief within ourselves unduly. Frequently, when someone has gone through a great ordeal, we hear the words that he or she, they're holding up much better than we feel we could hold up. And often what we're doing is noticing that from the outside, this person is living as if the grief had been completely conquered. Often what is really happening is that that grief is moving inward. And sooner or later it's going to come forward in a dreadful explosion. One should not pride himself unduly on his strength and his fortitude and keep this thing wrapped up all within himself. Back in the book of 2 Kings, there's a story of a king who was trying to hold out against the siege of the little city of Samaria. The siege was cruel, and the people were ill, and the people were starving, and many of them thought that the king wasn't having nearly as difficult time of it as they were. But one day in his suffering, because of the suffering of his people, he rent his clothes, and the people saw that underneath he was wearing sackcloth. Was wearing sackcloth because of his own suffering and because of the suffering of his people. Now there are times when it is good that we should keep the sackcloth hidden. One can go too far with his weeping and with his self-pity. But we would better realize that there is a need to give release to sorrow. It's not enough just to say that we must grin and bear it, or that's how the cookie crumbles, or the show must go on, or some such flippant attempt at courage. One girl put it thusly: "Though I am beaten, nobody shall know. I'll wear defeat proudly. I shall go about my business as I did before. Only when I have safely closed the door against friends and the rest shall I be free to bow my head where there is none to see." Now that girl hasn't come out of great tribulation. She's still in the midst of it. And if she is not going to let out what's welling up within her, in the words of Proverbs, her spirit can be broken. It may take months and it may take years. But unless she does something about it, that spirit is going to be broken. One, you see, can build up to a much more serious breakdown than weeping. It's not only good psychology, but it's good religion. Read back through your New Testament. Jesus wasn't ashamed to weep. Jesus wasn't ashamed to give expression to his sorrow. Go back to the experience of Mary and Martha, the time of the death of Lazarus. Ecclesiastes says, "By sadness of countenance the heart is made glad." It does us good, you see, provided that we give expression to our grief, not to our self-pity, not simply to attract the sympathy of our friends. And there's a great difference here. And so the person, you see, that comes out of tribulation doesn't try unduly to suppress an expression of sorrow, nor does he try to run away from it. A man who lived in Manchester, England, was asked why he drank so much, and he replied that it was the shortest way he could find out of Manchester. Well, it's not the shortest way out of Manchester. And it's not the shortest way out of grief, and it's not the shortest way out of trouble. It's the way of the immature person or of the coward. You see, one gets out of his tribulation as he faces up to it, and he seeks the means whereby this thing is going to enrich him rather than destroy him. And every time we get into deep grief, we are faced with this choice. From this, we're either going to find that which enriches, or we're going to find that which destroys. And we have both groups in this church. Some years ago, Peter Marshall had a book of sermons published, Mr. Jones Meet the Master. In it, there was one sermon entitled The Problem of Falling Rocks. And in that sermon, he likened the Christian treatment of trouble to the oyster into whose shell had come a grain of sand. He handled the illustration magnificently, as of course Peter Marshall would. He said that the oyster could, metaphysically speaking, shake its fist in God's face and say, "Why should this happen to me? What have I done to deserve this?" But the oyster doesn't do that. Or it could say, "This grain of sand isn't hurting me. There's really no such thing as pain. I'll just dismiss it from my mind." The oyster doesn't do that. It knows that pain is a reality. Or it might resort to an attitude of commendable courage. It might say that I must show everyone that I can take it, that I won't give in, I'll hold on if it kills me. But the oyster doesn't do that. Rather does it recognize the presence of that grain of sand, and it begins to do something about it. Slowly and patiently, Peter Marshall said, the oyster builds on the grain of sand. Layer on layer of a plastic milky substance that covers each sharp corner, coats every cutting edge, and gradually, slowly, by and by, a pearl is made, a thing of wondrous beauty, wrapped around trouble. That's the kind of treatment of sorrow that really brings one out of tribulation. It isn't, you see, that sorrow itself is good. It isn't. Just because something good come from it doesn't mean let's go to now and have sorrow because this is how character's built. Jesus never said that there was anything good in it. He never looked on suffering that way. He didn't even try to explain it. But he did see that sorrow could be a door opening outward. That's the secret, you see. Instead of letting it be a door that's opening inward and piling all things up within ourselves, Jesus taught that sorrow can be a thing with a door opening outward. And what happens to us depends on which door we allow to be constructed within ourselves. It's a leap of faith, you see, that something useful can be built around a grain of sand. It's the year 1521, and the French army had attacked the city of Navarre. Leading a group of Spanish soldiers was a young man whose name was Ignatius Loyola. A cannonball fractured his right leg. He was sent to his home by the victorious French. His leg was poorly set. He insisted on it being rebroken and reset. And for a long time, he was just lying there waiting for nature to heal things. He asked if he might have books to read. The only books available were the life of Christ and the flowering of the saints. And Ignatius Loyola wasn't the kind of person who could enjoy either one. But out of sheer boredom, he began to read. And gradually this thing took root in him, and gradually his soul began to grow. And from the reading of those books came one of Christianity's greatest saints, a soul that developed around a grain of sand. One, you see, when trouble comes upon him, can go back and read the book of Job. And he can read such words as the cursing of God that he ever was born. Why has this taken place with me? And he becomes bitter. And as he reads through Job's, he says, and Daniel come to judgment. This man is expressing just what's in my soul. And the door can keep opening inward, and inwardly he dies. Or he can begin to ask himself some questions from the other point of view. If the bereavement is the death of a loved one, probably the first question that should be asked is, what would that person think if he knew that I am destroying within myself the thing that he loved most in me? Just start from there and see where it leads you. Just let that be the beginning. You may find yourself trying to pull together some of these things that are left. Some such thinking must have been behind that familiar little poem, I walked a mile with pleasure. She chattered all the way, but left me none the wiser for all she had to say. I walked a mile with sorrow, but ne'er a word said she. But oh, the things I learned from her when sorrow walked with me. For you see, this is the fact that we must learn if we're not going to surrender to the past. If we're going to remember that there still has to be today and there still must be tomorrow. And that we're still going to go on planning and we're still going to go on living. Everett Palmer tells of two women in his congregation who had great tragedies come to them. Both in their 40s lost their husbands. One in an automobile accident, one with a massive coronary. And one of them broke off all normal relationships, gave up church life, stopped going to church. Her mind completely dwelling in the past, and she literally pulled down the shades of her home and lived a life of self-pity and of rebellion. The other woman kept up her friendships and she kept up her interests. And she explored services and responsibilities, and she became even more outgoing in her concern for others. And she became more understanding, and she became more compassionate, and people started to come to her who had griefs of their own and say, "You have done such a great job in continuing to live your life. Please, under God, show me how to do it." And she became a blessing to all who knew her. One must look to the future, you see. Those of you who've been to Venice, you know there's a famous bridge there that's called the Bridge of Sighs. It spans the distance between the royal palace and the old royal prison. It got its name from the fact that after prisoners were sentenced, they would cross the bridge from the palace to that prison, and when they were on it, many of them would break down and weep because they knew that they were probably getting the last sight of the blue sky. Well, there's a sense in which when we go through trouble, we're on a bridge of sighs. And at first it looks like a life sentence. At first it looks as though the last sight of a blue sky is gone. But you see, for the Christian, there's a difference here between our sentence and the sentence of the prisoners of Venice. With us, by the grace of God, the sentence can be shortened. That's the point. By the grace of God, the sentence can be shortened. Sometimes it comes by the opening of the door to new friendships. Sometimes it comes as people understand us the better and offer their love and their help. Sometimes it comes from what Edwin Martin was talking about when he said, "I'll go back to the pains and the pities that break the heart of the world with moan. I will forget in the grief of the cities the burden of my own." Or those lovely words of Catherine Mansfield's, "The secret is to lose oneself more utterly and to love more deeply." Tilly Olson wrote a series of stories entitled "Tell Me a Riddle." They're an intriguing little collection. In one of them, an old gentleman is at the deathbed of his wife. And she whispered, "Lost. How much I lost." And after a moment's silence, she added, "But there was joy, too." That kind of perspective comes to the person who lifts himself up from his grief and gets on the move again. Lost, how much I've lost, but there was joy too. And often in grief, people seem to forget that. They feel nothing but the grief, nothing but the sorrow, nothing but the trouble, but there was joy too. And the memory of that joy can help with the sorrow. Yes, it can. These are they that have come out of great tribulation. Jesus said, "In the world ye shall have tribulation, but I have overcome the world." The 7th verse of the 1st chapter of Revelation. It says, behold, he cometh with clouds, and every eye shall see him. Now that sounds like nonsense, doesn't it? Behold, he cometh with clouds. If we were writing it, we would have said, behold, he cometh in the sunlight, because it's then that one sees more clearly. I wonder what they're trying to say to us. I wonder if this book of Revelation isn't trying to say to us that God hasn't surrendered the dark valleys of the world to the devil. And that sometimes we can see him much more clearly in the darkness than we do in the light. Behold, he cometh with clouds. Lo, I am with you always, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned. And then those great words of John, and read them in the Revised Standard Version because they're a bit clearer. They say, so you have sorrow now, but I will see you again, and your hearts will rejoice. And no one will take your joy from you. In that day, you will ask me, no question. Beautiful? Nothing walks with aimless feet. Not one life shall be destroyed or cast as rubbish to the void when God hath made the pile complete. Faith like that's pretty important business if we're going to triumph over sorrow. It's a matter of saying from the heart, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. I suppose one of the first illustrations that those of us who went into the ministry heard in the matter of service was that illustration which says that the Sea of Galilee is fresh water because it has an outlet, and the Dead Sea is stagnant because it doesn't have an outlet. But Dr. Buttrick points out that it does. The outlet for the Dead Sea is upward. The sun draws the moisture toward the sky. And scientists say that there are deposits of potash around its shores, sufficient for the fields of the earth for 500 years. And that Calvary was like the Dead Sea. No exit but upward. And often sorrow is like that. It seems to hem us in, that there's no way out, there's no exit, but there is, upward. And through the centuries, people have found this to be sufficient. They've come out of great tribulation. So you have sorrow now. But I will see you again, and your hearts will rejoice. No one will take your joy from you. In that day, you will ask me no question. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
This morning's worship service emanated from Shadyside Presbyterian Church in Pittsburgh. Ministers of the church are the Reverend Dr. Howard C. Scharfe, the Reverend Dr. James R. Spear, and the Reverend J. Wayne Hanratty. Organist and choir director Russell G. Wickman. Today's sermon by Dr. Scharfe was titled, On Handling Sorrow. Your comments on these services are invited. Listen next Sunday at 11 o'clock for the regular worship service from Shadyside Presbyterian Church, Amberson Avenue on Westminster Place in Pittsburgh. Listeners are invited to send contributions to the radio ministry and benevolences of the Shadyside Presbyterian Church.